6 different types of bastard.
Welcome to Groovy Movies. I'm Lily Austin.
And I'm James Brailsford. Hello.
Hello. And this week on the podcast, we are talking about unfilmable books and the movies they have spawned. What happens when it works, what happens when it doesn't, and why directors are invariably so seduced by the challenge.
Yeah, what keeps bringing them back? I mean, because this is the thing, isn't it, about all art, is that do you lose something in translating from going from, from a film? I mean, what's very popular now is making musicals based on films. And then with it Mean Girls, then making a film based on the musical based on the film. Yes. Or was that Clueless? Anyway.
Yeah. Mean Girls was film, then musical film.
so yeah, I mean, so I think my point is, like, translating to a different medium. Oh, I guess that was the same medium anyway. But the point is, do we lose something, or is this something you're trying to capture in that original source material, and that's what draws you to it, and then you think, I'll bring that into the film, but that process of bringing it across somehow ruins it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the obvious example is a book and an adaptation we've talked about before, Don Quixote. James, that was the book and the film that to you stood out as the one we needed to talk about.
Yeah, immediately springs to mind just because of I've never read the book, but did you and I go and see a theatre play at it? I went to see it at the Vault Theatre a few years back when I was living in London.
That was probably Emily. I don't think I've seen something like that.
I don't know. I went by myself. I can't recall. But anyway, I went to see it, and everything about Don Quixote, it's all very meta. Like they say, it's the first real novel, but also the first meta, self-aware novel. And so even watching the play is referring to itself. So it's a very, I think, if you're a director who likes to take on like slightly less conventional storytelling, which is very much Terry Gilliam, who's a director who tried to make Don Quixote into a film twice. I think it appeals to someone who wants to try something a bit more experimental. But the thing is, that's just like a Pandora, that's just like a spiral you could go down. You could lose yourself in that.
I also think that, I mean, to dive right in, I think that it's also something about this character seems to really strike a chord with the directors who try and adapt this book, which in turn makes him kind of become like the character itself. Because Don Quixote, as you said, it's considered possibly the first novel ever written. It was published in Spain in the 17th century, written by someone called Miguel de Cervantes, who is it's kind of like Spain's Shakespeare. He's a big deal. And so it was already like a huge, and this book is huge. It's like hundreds of pages long. So on every level, it's kind of ambitious, right? Because, adapting something that's written that long ago, it's not going to be necessarily easy to interpret. And then, yeah, just the size of this book. But there have been so many adaptations, Orson Welles first tried to make an adaptation in the 50s.
Afuera, canalla ingente, rendíos a mi fuerte brazo, rendíos ante Don Quixote de la Mancha.
And kind of got caught up in constantly trying to rework it. So he never actually completed the film. And it's kind of the same thing with Terry Gilliam.
And then just so before we go, I mean, I guess I don't know much about the details of the story, but essentially it's about a middle-aged man who believes he's this character called Don Quixote. I don't know if he's actually called Don Quixote.
No, he's Don. Well, I mean, look, I'll hold my hands up. I've not read it either, but I think Don Quixote is the character. But he's a middle-aged man. And he becomes
delusional,
obsessed.
It seems.
Yeah, he becomes obsessed with these tales of chivalry and starts to fantasize about being a knight and riding into the world to explore adventures. And accompanied by this squire called Sancho Panza. Yeah.
Which the first time I heard the two words Sancho Panza was at Notting Hill Carnival, because my favourite sound system was the Sancho Panza sound system, and I had no idea that it was a literary reference. And then years later, when I heard about Don Quixote, I was like, oh right, that's where it come from.
Yeah. So Orson Welles was kind of the first to attempt an adaptation, and as I said, he died before it could be finished. And he just said that.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and the thing was, he kept saying that I'd need to not go to Spain if I was to complete this, because every time he went, he kind of got inspired by something else and wanted to rework it. So he was just sort of trapped in this. And I feel like you kind of see that with Terry Gilliam. We've talked about it before. There's this film called Lost in La Mancha, which is all about Terry Gilliam's, one of his many attempts, really. But at that point, the furthest he got into trying to make an adaptation of Don Quixote. And you really kind of see how he gets a bit kind of caught up in the minutiae, I think.
I've been fantasizing this for a very long time.
He gets tangled and whoop, off his horse.
The budget is half the money we need.
The LBO things so they can walk down.
Captain Chaos is completely in his element.
Really violent.
This film is in complete disarray.
We've got costumes and sets, but no actors.
What made this documentary interesting, this Lost in La Mancha, is obviously it wasn't meant to be a documentary about the failure of the film. It was meant to be a behind-the-scenes film. And the directors of that had worked with Gilliam before on 12 Monkeys, and they'd made a film called The Hamster Factor, which I remember watching as a DVD extra back in the early 2000s and thinking it was fantastic. It's feature length. It's not just a regular behind the scenes little 20-minute puff piece. It's an hour and a half feature film behind the scenes, and it's got real character and it tells real stories. It's not like a promotional puff piece. So clearly that was the intention with Lost in La Mancha, that it was going to be another kind of a feature film to accompany it. But of course, that became the film. The actual film they were making disappeared, and then they became they were no longer the B-movie DVD extra. They were the main course.
Yeah, absolutely. Because actually, so Terry Gilliam, he began working on Don Quixote as far back as 1989, though I think he said that he was always thinking about it. He was always enchanted by the character of Don Quixote, which I find very interesting because for everything I've heard about this character in this book, can't really relate. I can't really connect with this at all. So I find it quite interesting that this is a character that for certain directors
resonates.
It really resonates. Yeah. And so he went through 13 years of trying to get funding, nearly 13 years, until finally at the end of the 90s he secured funding from Europe, but it was a pretty small budget. It was 32 million, though it was funded completely by European finances. So it was actually the biggest European independent film ever made. Well, ever attempted to be made, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as you said, it was like after such a long time of trying to get this film off the ground, it was like, okay, we're finally doing this. And we've got some big names attached. Johnny Depp was going to play Sancho Panza, and which was a key part of the funding, having him in there. And that was, kind of at the height of his fame and stardom. So it was on the right track. But yes, you kind of see as the film goes on that it almost does seem like this film is cursed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It never seems to work out for everyone who's attempted it. It'd just be like, I didn't realize until you'd done the research for this that how many years Orson Welles spent trying to make one work. The same with Terry Gilliam. It's almost, I don't know what it is. It's a poisoned chalice for some degree.
Yeah, because with Terry Gilliam's, it was Jean Rochefort who was playing Don Quixote. He got incredibly ill. There was bad weather that delayed filming, and then Jean Rochefort had to just leave the film because he was so sick. Then because of all the delays, Johnny Depp had to leave as well, which basically lost them all the funding. And basically you just see in this film, it's so heartbreaking that eventually they just grind to a halt and they're stuck, and they've literally just had the financiers come and the backers come and have a tour of the set, and it's all very exciting. And basically it seems like the next day they're having to cancel the whole thing. It's an amazing film to really show you what filmmaking is really like, how painful it is, right?
Oh yeah. It's the old, I watched that when I was at film school, and it just, it hits hard, just to see somebody's dreams and it constantly trying to make it work and to adapt to all the problems, and it makes you realize you're only a few steps away from not being able to solve the problems enough, and whether as a filmmaker, you're always feeling that every day on set, there's always stuff to overcome, problems to get around, things to lose, lose and things to shoot, and oh yeah, so
Yeah.
it really hits home when you're a wannabe filmmaker when you see that.
Yeah, so that was in that documentary about that failure came out in 2002, and then in 2017, Terry Gilliam actually finally succeeded in making the film he was trying to make, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, this time starring Adam Driver in the role that Johnny Depp was meant to play of Sancho Panza.
I was born by the special will of heaven to restore the lost age of chivalry. I am Don Quixote de la Mancha.
And cut right there. Good work. I want to drop some of the shots.
Why?
Because it isn't working.
Because my client isn't happy.
Because the whole concept is ridiculous.
You are Don Quixote.
It's your concept, it's your vision.
I want you to keep an eye on her. Do that for me.
I'm the boss's wife.
Jackie!
We've both seen the film, James. Do you think it was well worth the wait?
Sadly not. And I was watching it just a little bit heartbroken, and I did wonder, was this the same script that was going to be shot in 2002? Because there's a lot where it feels quite rambling in parts, and I'm wondering, is that improvised? Is that written? I think there is a good film there, but it wasn't this, unfortunately. Like, there were moments I loved it, but it felt a bit draggy in places. Good ideas here and there, but overall, what do you think? I wanted to enjoy it. I wanted to get into it, and the first 15 minutes, like okay, but it just didn't. It kind of fizzled out.
Well, yeah. From what I could, it's hard to see it, to figure out exactly what was in the original version and what was new. But I think the core was correct. The idea that in this film, it's a contemporary man who then runs into someone who seems to be from Don Quixote's era and does identify as Don Quixote, and you're kind of torn between. It's like there are three levels to the film. There's the contemporary time the film is set in, when the film's been made, and then there's also this historical time, and then there's also the fantasy element that Don Quixote is in, which is kind of it's unclear exactly if that's in
which all sounds great fun. Like, when you described it, I'm like, yeah, great, cool. It didn't. It felt like the plot didn't kind of drive. I don't know. It was a bit meandering, and it's a fine line, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, because this story is like 1,000 pages long when it's published in English, there's just so much you're trying to fit in. I think I imagine from the like. In the documentary, there was this. We kept coming back to this scene with this windmill that Don Quixote imagines a giant's, and I mean, it's a nice metaphor. It's a nice childlike imagination fantasy thing. But it seems strange to me that we kept coming back to this one thing and this fixation and it seems like that was kind of like perhaps the problem, is that there are these vignettes that Terry Gilliam is very taken with and wants to show on screen, but like, how exactly is it all fitting together? Like, to me, it just didn't. I didn't find Adam Driver particularly interesting playing this director, and I think that was one of the differences with the earlier scripts. I can't remember I think Johnny Depp's meant to be an ad exec in that version, and they slightly update it. And I think this is better.
Because obviously, having not read the book, I wonder how much of the plot is that. I mean, because I almost got the impression from watching the stage play that I watched that every person who puts on Don Quixote is doing some kind of improvisational riff on the source material. I mean, the fact that it's constantly referring to itself. The version I saw was referring to the fact that it was a stage play. It referred to the fact that the sequel that was written might not have been a genuine sequel, and in fact was written by kind of people ripping off the original book. And so that was kind of part of the play, which obviously isn't in the original book, because it's commenting on all this stuff. So it almost feels like, and that taking on the Don Quixote novel is essentially you're riffing on it, and that's what I felt that this film was. I wondered how many sequences and things were adapted from the book, and how much were nothing to do with the book, but they're just kind of essentially rambling out this story. Which that's what my feeling was. Like, there was the very opening sequence, which was the windmill sequence, was the start of this Adam Driver film. But then I wondered afterwards how much of it, any of it, really is kind of taken from the novel.
For me, every scene that seemed jarring to me was from the novel, because otherwise, why would it be in here? That was my interpretation. But honestly, who knows? Who knows? But I mean, I was I found it interesting to read that there has been what's considered one successful adaptation, which is a Russian version that was made in 1957, and that's considered like the best we can do. And I think that just speak to what you're saying. I mean, like, every adaptation of a book is just an interpretation of it, one person's version, and you kind of have to, if you're going to do it well, you have to have a very clear vision of what you're going to take from it and how that's all going to be worked together to be a cohesive story in its own right. And yeah, it feels like with Terry Gilliam's version that there's nothing cohesive about this movie whatsoever. Like, I found it completely confusing. I won't even go into in detail like the women characters and how appallingly rendered they were. In that way, I was like, wow, this film, I can't believe it was made only 8 years ago. It's completely dated and irrelevant. Was kind of how I felt about it.
I just found it rambling, really. I found it hard to kind of... I usually like these kind of reality bending things, but it needs to feel like there's an intention behind it, and it just felt a little too loose. I wonder if the reason the Russian version is so well regarded, I wonder if it's the most literal adaptation of the book, because I get the impression from Orson Welles' decade-spanning attempt. I bet that wasn't an authentic adaptation. I think it was another riff on it. I wonder if the Russian version is more literal.
But I doubt that. I don't think that literal adaptations work very well. Well, we can discuss how it goes.
But what I'm trying to say is, it's already a meta book, so to try and be meta on top of meta, maybe it just like you end up with what Terry Gilliam made, which was like bits of everything all over the place. Not quite. I don't know.
Yeah, no, yeah. On that sense, yeah, I think you're right. I'm sure it was made in 57. It probably was pretty close in that sense to the book. But do you think that this book is unfilmable, or do you just think it was the wrong director, or not enough money was the other thing? I mean, he was really struggling with having such a tiny budget.
I'm going to go with unfilmable. I'm going to go with unfilmable, having not read the book. I feel really but he says, but please leave a comment and tell us that we're totally wrong and it's easily filmable, and I don't know what, everyone's made a mistake about it. But you've got to really be. It's like taking on the Odyssey, right? Christopher Nolan would not try and make the Odyssey as his first film or his second film. You've got to feel in control of your craft. And Terry Gilliam is a very good director, but I just feel like, I don't know.
Yes, no, I agree completely. Okay, well, speaking of ambitious adaptations, the other book that came to mind when we were having this conversation is Cloud Atlas.
That's it. The music from my dream.
There are whole movements I wrote imagining us meeting again and again in different lives, in different ages.
I can't explain it. But I knew when I opened that door, a powerful déjà vu ran through my bones.
I needed to find an excuse to get you to watch it, Lily.
Yes, because James has mentioned this film before, and I'd never had the pleasure of watching it. So here we are. So Cloud Atlas is a novel written by the British author David Mitchell, and it was adapted by the Wachowski sisters in 2012. Along with someone called Tom Tykwer, who also scored the film.
And Tom Tykwer also is the director of Run Lola Run, which was one of my favourite films from the 90s. Yeah, so he's a director in his own right who's done some great work. He also scored that film as well. And so, yeah, he collaborated on Cloud Atlas, which is interesting because, you never really have like siblings, or I kind of think you don't have many directed duos, but a directed trio. I mean,
and also a director who is also a composer. Very unusual combination,
yeah.
and really makes sense for this particular adaptation because the story has 6 plots that kind of are told in tandem with each other. And these 6 plots are from 6 different eras with 6 different characters. And one of the kind of a key plot is about a young composer who creates this piece called the Cloud Atlas Sextet? I find it hard to say, but whatever that thing is, that's part of the story. And so it kind of, so music is a kind of a key part of the story. So it sort of makes sense.
I mean, I would say the best way to summarize the film really is, I was going through the kind of research doc you pulled together. Just look at the cast list. Just look at that Wikipedia. If you want to get your head around like what to expect, that kind of is a good summation. Is the cast against the different time periods and what characters they are in each time period.
Yeah, it's true, because I normally, to take you behind the curtain, listeners, usually I jot down a few of the cast members and, you know, and who they play. And in this, I just took a screen grab from Wikipedia, because each of the main cast members play a different, most of them play at least 4 or 5, if not 6 roles. They'll play a role in each of these eras and each of these plots.
But not the same character.
But not the same character. And
not the same gender, sometimes not the same race. It's the whole thing.
So it is a little bit confusing at moments, especially early on when you're first trying to get to grips with that, because it can be unclear if this is just the same character but older, which does happen in one case, or it's just a different person completely in a different time period. So there's that to kind of contend with. But I guess the reason that they do that is because there's something about a reincarnation, right?
Yeah.
That's being kind of explored. So I think we can guess why this might have been considered an unfilmable book. But James, let's talk about it. Why do you think?
Because I mean, I'd only heard of Cloud Atlas as this big flop, and nobody liked it in a critical, it got pretty bad reviews by the critics. So, but I don't know why I ended up watching it, and I was like, okay, yeah, it's one of these films where, like, to be honest, it's a bit like Tenet. It's like, it doesn't quite work, but you've got to admire certain things of it. And actually, I find the things to admire about it, like, entertain me overall. So every time I put it on, like, I have a blast. Whether sometimes it doesn't work, it's a bit cheesy, but it just, there's a lot going on, put it that way. And even the bits you don't understand or not quite sure what the fuck's going on, you can still play the game of, is that Tom Hanks in prosthetics? Is that Halle Berry? It is a different character here. Like, so even that is quite fun to play. And also, I just think Hugh Grant's great in it. He plays 6 different types of bastard. It's like each character is awful, but it's like a different aspect of it, and he actually credits that with kind of turning his career around after having had a flop a couple of years before.
I find that very hard to believe, considering Cloud Atlas is not considered very, very fondly. I feel like Paddington was the real one that changed things. But maybe he probably wouldn't have got that without Cloud Atlas, I'm sure. Exactly,
because Cloud Atlas showed that he could do villains very well. He could also do kind of more character rather than romantic lead. So it kind of, this was the role that, you're right, for the casting directors, they saw him as a different type of actor, and so he got Paddington 2 off the back of that.
Well, James, they must have seen him in Bridget Jones, because he also played a bastard in that, lest we forget. But I would say his finest role to date. But we're getting off piece. Yeah, but to bring it back to this question of why unfilmable, I mean, in this case, it's obvious, right? It's very complex, multiple plots. I can see why it would be a struggle to get. Basically, I think in this case, unfilmable probably translates to unaffordable, because who is going to come up with the budget to make such a complicated film?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was at the time I think it's $100 million budget. But it was the biggest budget of any independently made feature film ever. So it was made outside of any of the Hollywood studios. So $100 million budget for an independent film. I don't know if that's been superseded, but certainly at the time it was one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I know people think that film wasn't a success, but I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was
Cloud Atlas.
Yeah, I thought it was great, and I mean, I think the Wachowskis are very good at making actually very mainstream, broad entertainment. Even Matrix or any of these movies, even Bound, has a very kind of broad Hollywood cinematic feel to it. And this film, yeah, it's complicated, but incredible. I found it very watchable, honestly.
Oh yeah, I
was
get sucked in, and because of all these different time periods, there's lots of different textures and looks and feels in the film. There's like the 1970s. There's a futuristic sequence. There's a historical bit. So we're constantly cutting between these different. It's not like we have one story, we finish it, we go on to the next. We're intercutting between them. So there's a lot of variety. I mean, I kind of love that. The futuristic one. I just love the aesthetic and the look of that. I don't know. I quite like that. There's just a lot to entertain you with, I think. And I don't know. I just love seeing Hugh Grant as that Kona chief in the kind of the cannibal character. You only see him in a few shots. I'm like, that's Hugh Grant. Love it.
Yeah, I found it a bit jarring, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Yeah, well, okay. So, I mean, these are a couple of examples of books that are considered to have been like an unsuccessful adaptation. But let's talk about some books that were called unfilmable but have actually are considered successful screen adaptations. We wanted to talk about A Clockwork Orange, which I think is like a good example of this.
There was me, that is Alex, and my 3 droogs, that is Pete, Georgie and Dim. And we sat in the Korova milk bar trying to make up our razoo docs what to do with the evening. The Korova milk bar sold Milk Plus, which is what we were drinking. This would sharpen you up and make you ready for a bit of the old ultra-violence.
This was Stanley Kubrick going back to basics after blowing the budget with 2001 Space Odyssey. He wanted to prove that he could do what the new wave of American directors were doing, like the Easy Rider guys, making films for like $500,000 and it making $100 million at the box office. So this was him hopping on that bandwagon and showing that he could also do that, to prove that he was still someone you should kind of give money to make films after 2001 was essentially... well, it wasn't a flop, really, but anyway, it went over budget and over schedule. So this was him showing he could still do a lean, tight, low-budget film. And I just think that when I first watched this film, it was the low-budget nature of it that put me off it. I didn't like it when I was younger because I was a fan of 2001, and that's a big spectacle. It's an epic. To suddenly go to that, which is another future-set science fiction, it just felt very jarring. However, as I've gotten older and watched the film multiple times, it's like it's tools for the job, isn't it? The world of Clockwork Orange is a grimier, much less. It's a dystopia. It's a sadder, smaller place than this kind of sprawling myth of 2001. So it suits being a lower budget. It suits being on locations in London. But yeah, I just find it like as far as like that's the brief you meant to hit, then it does the job.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because it was based on Anthony Burgess' novel published in 1962. And, I mean, the book itself was banned for a time because it's incredibly violent. And there's some very graphic sex scenes in the book as well as in the film. And also the thing that's complicated about it, so on the one hand, you could argue it's unfilmable but just because of that level of violence in this book. But also it's written in this kind of jargon because it's set in the future. It's set in a kind of a dystopian future, and this language is a kind of mix of Cockney and Russian. So it's also quite complicated to read. I did attempt to read it. It was my favorite film actually as a teenager.
Oh, really? Wow.
But it's a tricky read, which I think in and of itself can make any like potential funders for a film think that it's going to be too difficult to bring to the big screen because that's going to be difficult for viewers to watch theoretically.
Yeah. I feel like I've told this story before. If I have, apologies. But the thing is, my memory of this film before I even saw it was when I was doing my A-levels, we had like, in addition to the A-levels we were studying for our grades, we had like an elective just for fun activity. And the one I chose was film studies. And so we every week we'd watch a film one week, then the following week would be the discussion of the film from the previous week. So it was 1 week of watching, 1 week of discussing. And I missed the week for whatever reason of watching A Clockwork Orange. But for some reason, I came to the following week, which was the discussion of the film that I hadn't seen. But I knew something was up as soon as I got into the classroom because there was only one woman there, and normally it was like about 6 men, 6 women in the group, and I was like, what's going on here? That immediately felt odd. And before the class started, she announced, I'm here to represent all the rest of the women in the class to say that we were disgusted about this film and we can't believe that you showed it us, and we were shocked. I remember the tutor, he was like pale, he was like, what? I didn't realise. And so that was the impression. I was like, oh my God, it's so bad that all the women in my class refused to attend and sent essentially like an envoy to make a point. And so that really was like, fucking hell. Then when I finally watched it, I was like, well, I kind of disagree. It wasn't glamorizing the kind of sexual violence. It's certainly not, it's the way it's played, it's meant to be kind of quite traumatic. It's not, it's portraying Alex as this kind of, as much as you are kind of somehow seduced by him, he's a violent psychopath, and that's the whole point. I got that it was a nuanced point there that I think was missing back when we were 16 or 17 or something.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of women would probably still, and men probably would take. I totally see that position, and I think that's quite cool that they took a stand like that. Like, more power to you.
I mean, I was like, wow, this is the first time I think I'd seen people take some kind of stand on something. I was like, wow,
yeah. I mean, it's pretty awesome, and also, I mean, it absolutely reflects the reception that A Clockwork Orange got.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah. And this was the 90s, by the way. So this was way after it had been released. That was the reaction it was still getting.
Yeah, which is kind of extraordinary. And again, it clearly shows why it was considered unfilmable, because, I mean, it's an interesting combination, right? Because this film, as you said, was tiny budget, 1.3 million, but it grossed 114 million worldwide. So it was very successful. But then it was also very successful critically. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards in the year it came out, including Best Picture. So all in all, on the surface, very successful. But then quite quickly, there were these copycat acts of violence, allegedly. There were various unpleasant incidents which were attributed to the film. And also, Stanley Kubrick started to get death threats about the film. So on his behest, the film got withdrawn and it was banned for a few years in the UK, as well as several other countries.
Yeah. Like the thing is, pre-internet, which is so that whole time when I watched, or in the 90s when I was in the film club at college, because there was no internet, and that kind of, it was a very much an anecdote that it had been banned. It had been banned rather than Kubrick withdrew it, which that's only something I realized later. But at the time, it was like it had been banned, which wasn't quite the case.
But this man is clearly not afraid of controversy, because he's also the man who adapted Lolita a few years before. I mean, can't quite bring myself to watch it, but I hear it's a pretty bad adaptation.
Oh, you haven't watched it? Because I remember you listen to a podcast series about it, weren't you, or something, but not watching the film.
Yes, guys, if you're interested in the cultural relationship with Lolita, watch a podcast called Lolita Podcast. Very interesting.
It's certainly my least favourite Kubrick that I've watched. I've only watched it twice, and not that fussed.
But I'm very fascinated by Kubrick's interest in these controversial books, because I believe both Lolita and A Clockwork Orange were banned, or at least had a lot of controversy around them when they were released, when they were published.
Yeah. I mean, I just think he wants to make films that make a splash, and from everything that I've read about Kubrick in his interviews, especially when he talks about why it takes him so long between films, like it was 14 years, I think, between the Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, and it was 70s, is that he's looking for a good story. Because he can't just crank them out. He wants to make something that's worthwhile, that's going to stay around, that, like we are right now. We're still talking about Clockwork Orange. Regardless of its merits, we might think of it, it's still in the cultural discussion. So I think with Kubrick specifically, just because there's lots of interviews where people are asking him about his process and why it takes so long, he's looking for a good story, and I know that he said this about music, and I suspect this is what he thinks about books or adapting novels. Right, with music, he said he initially had a composer composing for 2001: A Space Odyssey. The guy had a fucking nervous breakdown, was actually stretchered out from the studio into hospital because of the pressure and the anxiety of working for Stanley Kubrick, because Stanley Kubrick kept giving him temp score, and all the temp score was all classical music. So here's this guy who I'm sure was an excellent composer, but he was being asked to make something as good as Stravinsky or, or the classics. So, and Kubrick said, in the end, why would I want to have somebody try and compose a score when I can choose from this history of hundreds of years of like expertly crafted music where they was putting months and months, maybe years of work into crafting this piece of music, and then it's been played by, recorded by the best orchestras in the world and all this kind of stuff. So I suspect he sees a similar thing with books. Am I going to be able to write a book, or could I get a screenwriter to write a script, especially on a condensed schedule, compared to if I took a novel that somebody may have, again, spent months, years writing, and take that as my source material and then adapt that source material? I think there's like a quality component he's looking for. He thinks that essentially if I stand on the shoulders of somebody who's already done excellent work and then I just elevate it with my own style, I think that's what may draw a lot of directors to adapting books, is that they've already got an original idea, a source idea that's already been well developed by somebody.
I like that. That's a very generous interpretation. I think that the and I
oh, come on.
and I think that's definitely part of it for sure. I wonder if look, it depends on the director, but I wonder if a big part is also you want to have your name in the same sentence as some of the great writers of our time. If we look at all these the books on this list, we're talking about novels, but most of them are, novels that have been considered great. Okay, Cloud Atlas is a slightly, it's a new, well received, but it's
a bit too soon to know if it's going to, in 20 years' time. It's a bit too soon.
But A Clockwork Orange was already considered like a contemporary classic. We also wanted to talk about Slaughterhouse 5, which again has become, Kurt Vonnegut. He is very well regarded as a great writer, and I really want to talk about The Great Gatsby. I think this is a book that is considered one of the great American novels, and it's consistently considered unfilmable. And yet there have been 4 adaptations. Directors are very tempted. It's very alluring to them to try and make this book into a film. And I think it's because if you're the director who made the great adaptation of this great novel, you're almost as good as the writer, right?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a perfectly. I think that's definitely plays into it for sure. I have to say I watched the Baz Luhrmann Great Gatsby for the first time last week in its native 3D. I had an absolute blast. I loved it. And I read the book when I was I think for my GCSE, so it's been a long time ago. And from my memory, the film adaptation, it kind of it felt like the book I recall reading. I've also seen again.
What?
Decades ago. Yeah, I don't know. Correct me, please, Lily, because I'm literally going on ancient memory. I was like, this seems to be like, who is Gatsby? Where did he get his money from? And this, the shallow emptiness of like life at that time. And I don't know. In my very basic memory of it, talk me. Tell me why I'm wrong.
My head is like exploding over here, but I'm like, don't interrupt. Okay. Well, okay. Each. It's I disagree. I think that with both F. Scott Fitzgerald's book and I mentioned Kurt Vonnegut and Slaughterhouse 5. Part of the reason they're so well regarded is because they have this very particular voice. Both these writers have a particular way of telling a story that is so specific to them and beautiful in very different ways, I must say, but. That trying to adapt that, obviously you can't take that particular way the story is told with that particular author's voice is never going to move across to that. And I think that, on, what we kind of mentioned about like an adaptation that stays truer to the story. Yeah, you might be able to hit the beats of the story. The plot might stay exactly the same. But if you lose the kind of the voice and the sense of it's hard to explain in such because I'm being very vague, but I think with the book, there's this internal monologue, the story is told from the neighbor's perspective, And he's an unreliable narrator, and I don't think that is captured in either of the most recent adaptations.
In the adaptation watch, I didn't realize, because again, it was decades ago, I didn't realize he's an unreliable narrator because he seems to be fairly reliable in the Baz Luhrmann film.
Yes, and it's the same in the 1974 version. And also just I actually think that, I mean, okay, maybe this is just, but to me, especially in the 2013 version, but in both versions, both the 74 version and the 2013 version, the party scenes are so fun. They're really, beautifully rendered in both cases in very different ways that I think, and it all seems like a jolly, really. And the whole point of the book, there's this kind of dreamlike sense to it. And it was almost, I feel like the book puts a point across very well of the kind of emptiness, the pointlessness, and the danger of this kind of excess. Like it's kind of like an anti-wealth, anti-class book. And I really don't think that comes across at all in Baz Luhrmann. I don't think Baz Luhrmann is anti any of those things. I think he loves a party, and that's what he found fun. He liked the era. He liked the, it's such a vibrant film.
Could it all be true? He had an extraordinary sense of hope, but I had the uneasy feeling that he was guarding secrets.
And the book is not like that.
Yeah, I mean, I when I was watching, I got drawn into the parties, but I also was aware of how shallow it was and how empty the people were, which I guess is an echo of what you're saying. But I agree with you, is that it's you are drawn into it, but I thought that was the idea to kind of Tobey Maguire's character, I've forgotten his name, that he gets seduced slowly by this lifestyle, but then it also eats him away because there's nothing to it. But it certainly, I see what you mean. I mean, that's one of the main things about a book, isn't it? Is the fact that you can do things like you can have first-person perspective, third-person perspective. How do you do that in film? I mean, the obvious thing, which was done in Great Gatsby, is that you have voiceover, so you kind of immediately know, okay, this is the person telling me the story. But it's a very literal translation of first-person, isn't it? Because when you read a good novel that's first-person, you're in their thoughts and they're sharing their thoughts, and it's not quite the same as just having them spoken out over the top of some images in a film. It's getting that atmosphere of when you're reading a novel and having that experiential feeling of kind of being talked to directly from one person's head to yours. It's very difficult to get that across in a film, and I think that's where a lot of the nuance, a lot of the lost in translation disappears.
Yes, but having said that, on the other hand, I think that the legacy of this film is of the book, it's such that the expectations are sky high, and realistically, yes, I mean it's completely unrealistic to think that you can. Of course, you're never going to be able to take the voice of a book, though actually I will get into it, but I think there are some films that do it quite successfully. But for something like this, it's, maybe the expectation shouldn't be that it's like perfectly captures everything that F. Scott Fitzgerald did with his book, and instead we're going to use a really good story and do something different. I guess that there is this other side to it, and for me, I don't personally like Baz Luhrmann's style, but you enjoyed the film, and it's a solid story. And so I think maybe it's rather than saying these books are unfilmable, it's about understanding that it's just never going to be that book as a film. It's going to be a film based on this book, but it's its own thing altogether. Because I watched the 1974 version for the first time, ahead of our conversation, which is directed by Jack Clayton. And can I say, Robert Redford, I think is perfect casting as Jay Gatsby. That was really.
Oh yeah.
I don't think Mia Farrow was actually very good as Daisy. For some reason, I find that Daisy seems to be hard to cast. I also don't think Carey Mulligan was perfect in this role. She's just too likable for me to be Daisy.
Oh, right, okay.
But I think that I really, really love that film. I thought it was really beautifully done. And yes, doesn't capture much of what's wonderful about the book, but I liked watching it. I was happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well with Baz Luhrmann's style, because he has a very surface style, I think. But again, I think that kind of suited the Great Gatsby story, because I find Baz Luhrmann's style, I admire it more than I enjoy it, as in, just the constant invention. Every shot's creative. There's so much going in the frame, but I just find it quite exhausting because it's so breakneck.
Yes.
But I think having to work in 3D slowed him down a fraction, not much, but it just meant that I think I enjoyed the experience much more than, for example, Elvis, which I found quite relentless.
Yeah, I agree. I did as well. But I just want to, just as we were talking, I was kind of thinking about a few adaptations that I think really do capture the book perfectly. Right now I'm reading The Virgin Suicides. Now, it's a weird experience reading this book because I've seen the film many times. I really like that film. The book feels exactly the same. So far, beat for beat, it's exactly the same. And I feel the film tonally captures the book perfectly. So it almost feels like a pointless exercise. It feels like I'm just reading. Yeah. It feels like it was taken from screen. But to me, that's, good job, Sofia Coppola, excellently done. And I feel, and I had a similar feeling about Call Me by Your Name. Not exactly the same, but I was very impressed reading this book because I'd seen the film previously. That the vibe, the sensibility, the feel of the book is definitely captured in the film.
Yeah, I watched the version of 1984 that was made in 1984 for the first time last year, and that I thought was a pitch perfect adaptation of the book. Which is the really oppressive. You can tell from the first frame that none of the characters have got any kind of free will in this world, that it's all going to go bad. And it just captures it so well. I mean, it's not a happy watch. It's gloomy and it's sad, and it really gets under your skin, especially when you realize how on the ball he was about where the world it was going back when he wrote the book. So for me, that's an almost pitch perfect adaptation of the source material.
Yes, that's a good one. I totally agree with that. Okay, well, on the flip side, having discussed some books that have been successfully adapted, are there any books that were better as films?
Any books that were better as films?
Wow.
You. Okay. That's
Okay, I asked you this question just because it suddenly popped into my head when I was thinking about this conversation.
Yeah.
And in fairness, I didn't finish it, but I began reading Madame Doubtfire by Anne Fine when I was a kid.
Which I didn't realise was the book that the film was based on, yeah.
It was absolutely, yes. Mrs. Doubtfire was based on this book. And I have to say, the book was quite fun, but the magic of Mrs. Doubtfire, the magic of Robin Williams in this part goes so far beyond the book. It's kind of incredible.
Wow.
And I was listening to an interview with Chris Columbus where he said that they're in the process of making a documentary about the making of Mrs. Doubtfire, which I'm very intrigued to see, because I'd love to see all of his improv and all of the kind of magic that was captured when they were making that film. But I think it's a very, very rare thing, and maybe we're being a bit unfair to even just directly compare books and films, but that was one that came to mind. So why do you think, given how tricky it is and how much bad press you can cop for adapting a book unsuccessfully, why do you think it is that directors are always so tempted to try and adapt books that are considered unfilmable?
I think we've kind of touched upon it, but let's kind of bullet list. So I think there's the fact that you've got a pre-existing IP, which we like to say these days. So your story's already taken care of. So you're not generating an original story, you're adapting. So maybe it gives you a good thing to start with.
And a fan base. I mean, look at Lord of the Rings.
Look at Lord of the Rings, Gone Girl,
Harry
stuff
Potter.
Like that. And then, like you mentioned, this kind of a bit of an ego, maybe, to put your name in the same conversation, the same sentence, really. And also, I think the challenge, because with the books we've discussed, they're not easy books to adapt. If you're a director who's somebody who doesn't want to be a journeyman director, who wants to take risks, who wants to kind of show what they can do, well, take one of these unfilmable books, take Don Quixote, show us what you can do. But obviously, the problem is that you're taking a much bigger risk. I mean, I'm fairly confident Nolan's going to pull the Odyssey off, but you wouldn't want to take on the Odyssey. You want to feel confident in your abilities, or maybe this is the one where Nolan fucking stumbles. Will it be? I mean, I'm fairly confident he won't, but it could be.
I mean, yeah, but I can't believe we haven't even got to Nolan yet when he is in the midst right now of adapting.
Right. I mean, I think he just wrapped. And it's been. I mean, I haven't got official word on this, but I think it's his longest shoot he's ever had. I mean, he started it in January of this year, I think, and he's only just wrapped.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, actually, because when I was trying to think about because it does seem that for the most part, any well-known book, there's been at least an attempt to adapt it at some point. It's just, books are snapped up often as soon as they've been, but even before they've been published in some cases. So I was trying to think about a book that hadn't yet been adapted that is definitely considered unfilmable, and kind of definitely in the same vein as the Odyssey. The thing that came to mind was Dante's Inferno, which my husband informed me is actually a very successful video game.
Okay.
But it sounds like it would be quite tricky to do as a film because it's not so much a narrative as like single encounters with different people.
Right.
So I don't know if it'd work exactly, but I'd be intrigued about that. But I have to wonder, is there even such a thing as an unfilmable book? Because I did see a Stanley Kubrick quote that said, if it can be written or thought, it can be filmed. Do you think that's true, James?
I think that's completely true. I think that's absolutely true, because I think he was that quote is more from him saying that you can kind of put anything on screen these days.
Okay.
But I think there's no unfilmable book, but is there a successful adaptation of a book? And that's the thing, is it's like I could make a version of the Odyssey right now, or around Hebden Bridge with people flying on the street. Would it be a successful adaptation? Would it be something that wants to watch? That's the big thing, isn't it? So
yes.
They can all be filmed, but can they be done well and can be done successfully?
But I mean, yes, okay. So unfilmable really means like a good film. So I guess we're just always in the working progress. When it isn't a success, we're still in the process of trying to achieve the successful adaptation. And then, I mean, and often like then, the more successful it is, it seems like these days, the more chance it's going to be adapted again. I mean, look at Harry Potter. I mean, I actually don't think those films are particularly good, but, generally they're considered a success, and they're about to make a new TV show of the exact same thing.
I went to see the fourth one a couple of days ago. It was back in the cinema.
Really?
It was fine. But I also just thought there's absolutely no need to make these again as a TV series. As far as what we're talking about, I think as far as how the books are how the books are, here's a version of the books on film. I don't think you can really better or worse them, and I think it's a totally redundant exercise in basically trying to make more money by making this TV series. If you like the books and you want to see a film version, then these ones, for better or worse, they're pretty good. The third one is especially good because it's Alfonso Cuarón, but
I agree with Alfonso Cuarón. Yeah, I agree. The third is the best one. For me, I don't think the films are good at all. I mean, I think that some things are nice. Christopher Columbus caught the magic.
They're like a storybook. If you've read the books and you want little visual reminders of the bits you enjoyed in the books, then they do.
Yes, but is that what we want? I mean, I would love some good acting from the main characters. And I would I mean, that's the main thing I have an issue with. It's just that the acting is poor, and so I find it quite unengaging. So I'm very hopeful for this new TV adaptation, even though I know it's marred in controversy, obviously, around the author of the book. But we'll see how it goes. But I hear what you're saying. Okay, we definitely didn't have it in our notes that we were going to start talking about Harry Potter, but
no, I know, but it's a book adaptation, isn't it? I suddenly realised, Christ. But and ones that you're saying could be improved upon. So let's see I guess we should do a compare and contrast of a couple of episodes of the TV show, not that I particularly want to, with the film version. Which one do it better? And also, people are asking, after the Odyssey, where's Christopher Nolan going to go next? Okay, I mean, I think he'll go smaller. He always seems to, but maybe he's going to be all right. You know what? I cracked the Odyssey. If it does well, I'm going to do Don Quixote.
Oh, God. Poor Terry Gilliam.
Do it.
I think he'd be so upset. That was the thing that was very heartbreaking with his eventual adaptation, is this card at the start of the film saying how many years it had taken to make this film, which when you then proceed to watch a quite average movie at best, it's a little bit heartbreaking to see, oh God, it took you so long, and
that's what I think is a little bit like the Superman thing I've mentioned in the other episode, where because of the connection to it, it's not just that the film may be good or bad, it's that, especially with Don Quixote, that there was a lot of decades of work trying to make it happen, and for it to be just, like you say, crushingly average at best, that's just makes it sad, because that was a life's work of him getting that on screen.
Yes, gosh, heartbreaking. Okay, great. So we're ending on a happy note.
Oh God.
Yeah, so a bit of a sad note to end on. But on the plus side, we've got Christopher Nolan's Odyssey to look forward to. So
yeah, I think we can do a follow-up to this. Like, did Chris manage to do it? Did he manage to take what everyone says is meant to be the definitive, unfilmable novel? And did he do it? I suspect he will. I suspect he's not going to go into this like, oh, don't know what I'm doing. I think he's had a script he's been working on. I think when the behind-the-scenes stories come out, like, because he always talks about he's got ideas in his desk that he pulls out every now and again. I suspect this is the one that's been there for 20 years. He's just like, I'm just working on the Odyssey, and okay, I've got the dinner ready. Dinner's ready, Chris. Come on, okay, I'll just put my script back in the drawer. 2,000 pages.
Okay, yes. Well, we'll definitely revisit when the film comes out next year, and we can see. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Groovy Movies.
Thank you as always, and if you could leave us a like or give us a review, everything helps to get the podcast out to a wider audience.
So we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Groovy Movies is produced and edited by us, Lily Austin and James Brailsford. And James also produced the theme music.
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Groovy Movies Pod, or email us groovymoviespod@gmail.com.
For more information about the films discussed, check out the show notes.